Hi everyone, welcome back to these processes from the project management body of knowledge. Now we're starting to delve into the risk management processes and we are identifying the risks for our project. Where does identifying the risks fit within the overall project management body of knowledge and the process group and knowledge area mapping? Well, we're in the project risk management knowledge area, and we're also in the planning process group. So we've been through all of the different areas, scope, cost, schedule, now resources and communications, and all of that will actually have an input into the risks that we find throughout our project. So now it's time to identify those risks. Identifying the risk is the process of identifying individual project risks as well as the sources of overall project risk and documenting their characteristics. So who owns them? Where do they sit? What's the probability and impact of them happening? The key benefit of this process is that the documentation of existing individual project risks and the sources of overall project risks are documented correctly. So now everyone is on the same page. Everyone can appropriately respond to those identified risks because they're made public for everyone in the project and in the organization to know about. Here's an overview of identifying the risks in your project. As we've seen, we consider both the individual project risks, which might impact our project delivery, but also the sources of overall project risk, where we might impact the business or the organization that we're delivering the project into. And identifying the risks is an iterative process, so we might be improving it or adding to it or changing it over time. Risk owners for individual project risks may be nominated as part of the Identify Risks process and will be confirmed during perform qualitative risk analysis. So, of course, we need to know who owns the risk, who's responsible for managing it through to completion. Let's look at the inputs, tools and techniques and outputs for identifying risks. And we've got the project management plan, and almost every part, as we saw, of the project management plan will feed into the risks that could happen as part of our project. The resources might not be available. The quality, we might find defects. The cost might be going off track, the schedule might be going off track, the requirements themselves might be unfeasible. So all of these things will impact the identification of risks in our project. We might have the project documents, agreements that have been made, procurements documentation if we're having a third party do part of the work, or enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. Tools and techniques that we'll see for identifying the risks are our favorite: expert judgment. So we're going to need that expertise of the people in those business areas where those risks are happening or could be delivered into. Data gathering. So we're going to need to extract information from all of those people, brainstorming with them, doing checklists with the business, and interviews one-on-one style. Data analysis, of course. Once we've gathered that information, we may need to find the real cause of the issue with root cause analysis. Assumption and constraints analysis. SWOT analysis for high-level risk analysis, and threats, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and document analysis. So what are the documents that we've seen? The requirements that we've gathered so far, are they actually feasible? Do they have any risks embedded in them naturally? And interpersonal and team skills to help facilitate all of that information and extract that information from our stakeholders. Prompts lists and meetings as usual to tie it all together. Outputs. We're going to have the risk register, so the actual register of all of the risks that we have listed, the risk report to report up to executives or the project sponsor or other project stakeholders that need to know about the project risk, and project documents updates, so any issues and assumptions and lessons learned. Identifying the risks has that big input into the risk register and the risk report, as we've seen. And all of these subsidiary plans will have an input into identifying risks themselves. So let's look at the inputs in more detail. The project management plan, as we've seen, all of our other subsidiary plans will be an input because we need to know all of the details about resources. Are they, do we have the right resources? Is not having the right resources a risk for our project? Schedule, is the schedule on track? Is the cost on track? Do the requirements meet what our customers wanted in the first place? Anything that could go wrong, any gaps here, we could be looking at as a risk. Project documents as well. So for that very reason, any cost estimates or duration estimates, are these things on track? How are they going? And resource requirements, do we have the right people and when? And any requirements documentation for that requirements information. Are the requirements actually able to be delivered? Are they feasible to create? And any issues that have come up over the course of our project so far could turn into a higher risk type event, and so we need to keep an eye on those issues as they evolve if we haven't called them out as a risk previously. And of course the stakeholder register, because the stakeholders who are involved, we need to know, do we need to add stakeholders, take them away, change them, and we need to know who's involved so we can gather that expert judgment as usual. So agreements we might have are the existing milestone dates, the contract type, if we're procuring or getting a third party to do part of the work for us, maybe it's a fixed fee, maybe it's plus an incentive fee, for example, and that might be a way of us to reduce the risk. And of course, if we're having someone else do the work, sometimes that can increase the risk or it can decrease the risk because they're taking on all the risk, but also we can't see what they're necessarily doing until they've delivered it. So it could go either way. Acceptance criteria and awards or penalties that might sway the risk in either direction. Maybe we're awarding someone something if they finish early, and that's our way of mitigating risk. Procurement documentation, of course. So as we saw, having someone else do the work for us, a third party that we're procuring services from, could increase the risk because we actually don't have any control over their process now. But it could also decrease their risk, our risk, because now they're taking on all of the risk of creating something and managing something for us. So depending on the circumstances, and the circumstances will be different in almost every project that you have and every organization. So these things we just need to be aware of and call them out. That's why we have procurement documentation as an input for this process. And enterprise environmental factors, of course, that might influence identifying risks could be published material, including commercial risk databases. So are there any existing risks out there that there's a database of that we know about that could be an input for our process? Academic studies. So now, do we need to know the impact of something, and has there been a study on this done out there in the real world as well? So then we can just gather that information instead of having to go through it ourselves. Benchmarking results from other companies, maybe similar processes or projects, but from other companies. And so we don't have to go through all of the pain of those lessons. We can actually learn those lessons from the benchmarking results. And industry studies or similar projects, lessons learned, our typical lessons learned register. Organizational process assets, of course, will be our templates, project files, including any actual data that we have. Organizational and project process controls, so how are processes controlled currently within the organization? Risk statement formats, so maybe there's a certain way that we need to identify these risks. Maybe there's a register that's already existing that we need to place these risks into. How is everything managed already within the organization from a templates and processes point of view? And of course, checklists from previous similar projects. Let's look at the tools and techniques for identifying risks. We've got our favorite expert judgment, where we need to consider expertise from people from similar projects or the actual business areas themselves. When we're delivering the project into the business, then we're going to have expert judgment from these people who are actually doing the work on a regular basis. And we need to gather that information from them. Maybe they say, this process isn't actually going to work the way you think it's going to work. And because we do it every day, we need to get that information from them. And same for similar projects. Maybe there was a similar project done 2 years ago, but it actually failed and it never went ahead. Now we need to know why. What are the risks involved with doing this particular project again? Data gathering. So we'll need to do brainstorming with a whole bunch of people, getting everyone in a meeting together, asking a key question. What do we want to solve? Why did Project X fail 2 years ago, for example? and we have all of this information. They say it failed because of this, brainstorming, 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 and maybe we can gather those together in similar groups in an affinity diagram as well. Checklists and interviews one-on-one style for maybe there's just one person who we need to gather information from. Data analysis we'll see as a tool and technique as root cause analysis. So if we need to find the real cause of the problem. So what was the problem with that project 2 years ago, to give that example again? And how do we get to the real cause of why it actually failed so we can mitigate that risk for our project? Assumption and constraint analysis, SWOT analysis with our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. So just brainstorming under those framework key questions. And document analysis, so looking at the requirements documents, looking at the project management plan, looking at the schedule documents. Are they on track? Are there any risks posed through analyzing those documents? Now, tools and techniques will also need interpersonal and team skills. So basically this is us managing and working with other people in a positive and constructive way. So we might need to facilitate through gathering all of this information as usual. As a project manager, we'll need to lead a meeting and lead people through the process of root cause analysis, of data gathering, of gathering their expertise on the risks and gathering the risks themselves. We might use prompt lists for this case as well, where we've got different examples, and you could even create your own, but the common ones you'll see are PESTLE or PESTEL even is called, TCOP and VUCA. VUCA is a common one where we're looking at what's the volatility of the situation, so how likely is it to fluctuate or change? What's the uncertainty? So how much do we know about it and how much can we figure out about it? The complexity, so how easy is it to understand, or how complex is it to understand? Maybe it's quite complex, so we'll never understand it. And then maybe we need to get a third party or procure someone's services to do that. And of course, ambiguity. So how much can we actually see into it? Is it extremely opaque? Is it like a brick wall? Or is it like a sheet of paper that we can almost see through, for example? How much do we know about it? How much can we know about something? These are just a few different ways of frameworks of looking at risk from a different lens or point of view. And of course, tying it all together with our favorite meetings, we'll need to facilitate meetings, and one of the most common ones here is to conduct a specialized risk workshop. So we might need to do a few of these because it's an iterative process, as we've seen. We might do it at the beginning, for example. Now the project is going along, and now we also need to do another risk workshop. So as it's going along, we might need to update it again. So this is why it's an iterative process, and we'll be finding risks as we go along and as the project evolves over time. Outputs that we'll see for identifying risks is the risk register itself. So this risk register captures details of the identified individual project risks. The results of other risk processes will be impacted by this. So performing qualitative risk analysis, where we're doing the impact and probability of the risks and what's the likelihood of it happening. They're planning the risk responses, so planning our response to those risks, implementing those risk responses, and then monitoring those risks over time. All of those are recorded in the risk register as those processes are conducted throughout the project. Again, making it an iterative process that we're sort of adding to as the project goes along. For our risk register, we'd like to have a list of identified risks. So what is the list of risks that we came up with by gathering the expertise from the people in the business, the people in the organization, the people in the project, all of those things? What risks are there? What is our list? And of course, we want to have things like a short risk title, the risk category. So what was that overall category, higher level category of risk? Maybe it's a technological risk. Maybe it's it's a people risk. But there are many different versions of this, many different technological risks in our project, for example. Current risk status. So is it open? Is it closed? Is it in progress? One or more causes. So what is the cause of the risk? one or more effects. So does it have a high impact, high probability? What's the trigger for that risk to happen? What causes the risk to happen? And of course, how does it link into the work breakdown structure? So our requirements and our deliverables. Now we'll need to know who owns the risk, the potential risk owners, and our list of potential risk responses. The risk report is also an outcome here because what we're going to need to do is report the details of those risks to stakeholders in the project. That could include our project sponsor, who is potentially funding this project or giving resources for the project. Could include a steering committee, for example. Could include a project management office. Could include the functional manager, functional in the organization. So maybe where we're delivering the project to. Or it could just be project stakeholders, for example, who need to know about these risks. But either way, we're taking that information and we're giving them a summary, the sources of the overall project risk, where are they coming from, and a summary information on those identified individual risks. So that's a nice way to just get that information out there and everyone is on the same page. And of course, lastly, we might need the assumptions log. What assumptions have we made? Any issues that have been raised that might turn into, that we might need to manage as risks later on. And lessons learned. Have we learned any lessons? Do we need to update that lessons learned register for future projects? And that is all the detail for identifying risks as part of the project management body of knowledge.